Imagine this. You're standing inside a small room. The only way out is a metal door. You push it. Nothing. You push harder. The door is completely jammed. And now you understand something that hits you like cold water. You're stuck. You're physically trapped in a space that's maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. Your phone is in your truck outside. You have no way to call anyone. You have no way to use your radio. Around you, there's just the humming of a machine in the walls. But here's where it gets insane. Just on the other side of those walls, there are people, multiple people. They're using the ATM right now. They're withdrawing cash. They're checking their balance. They're doing their banking like it's any other day. Some of them might actually hear you if you scream loud enough. But they don't. Because they think you're just a weird noise. Or construction noise. Or something from the street. You could be standing so close to someone that they could literally touch the wall you're leaning against, and they still wouldn't know you're suffocating behind it. This is the story of a man named James, a contractor from Corpus Christi, Texas. On July 12, 2017, he walked into what seemed like a routine job. He had no idea he was walking into a nightmare that would last 2 hours. 2 hours that would feel like 2 days. So let me ask you right now before we start. If you were trapped in a room with no phone, no way to call for help, and people just outside the wall, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you panic? Or would you think of something else? Because James did something that nobody was ready for. And what he did was so clever, so desperate, and so human, that it would end up going viral across the entire internet. But here's the crazy part that most people don't know. The way his story was told online wasn't actually true. The internet got it wrong. Everyone got it wrong. For years, people thought he was stuck inside the ATM machine itself, like he was trapped in the mechanical guts of the thing. But that's not what happened at all. And when you find out what really happened, you'll understand why this story is so much more terrifying than any version you've heard before. Let's rewind to that morning. July 12th, 2017, Corpus Christi, Texas. It's early in the morning. A Bank of America is undergoing some renovations. The branch isn't fully open yet. There's construction happening. Some employees are already inside preparing things for the day. And there's James, a contractor. He's been hired to do some work on the ATM. He knows what he's doing. This is routine for him. He's done this kind of work before. He walks into the bank. He heads toward the ATM room. This room is where the ATM is stored. It's basically a vestibule, a small chamber, that connects the inside of the bank to the outside where customers access the machine from the drive-thru. It's not a big space, but it has everything the ATM needs. It has the machine. It has some security equipment. It has the door that separates it from the main bank area. And it has the external door or window where customers interact with the ATM from outside. James enters the vestibule. He's there to work on something routine. He goes about his business. And then he steps toward the exit, toward the door that leads back into the main part of the bank. He reaches for the door handle. He pulls. Nothing. The door doesn't budge. He pulls again. Harder this time. Still nothing. That's when the realization starts to dawn on him. The door is jammed. And I'm not talking about a lock malfunction. I'm not talking about someone locking him in intentionally. The door is literally stuck. It's jammed on metal and on the drywall and on all the renovation materials that were being used. The contractors who were doing the renovation work had installed new materials. They'd used self-tapping screws. They'd moved things around. And in the process, the door frame had shifted just enough to trap the door in place. James pulls. The door doesn't move. He pulls again. Nothing. Now the panic starts to set in. He tries the handle again. He tries using his full body weight. He throws his shoulder against it. The door remains completely immovable. He's trapped. He's actually trapped in this small room. His immediate reaction is to scream. He screams for help. He's shouting. He's yelling. He wants someone to hear him. But here's the problem. He's inside an ATM room. An ATM room is built to be secure. It's built to be somewhat soundproof because there's security equipment in there. The walls are thicker than normal drywall. And on the outside of the building, there's traffic noise. There's the sound of cars passing by. There's street noise. There's all kinds of ambient sound that's louder than a human voice, coming from inside a secure room. So, when James screams, the people outside hear nothing. Or they hear something so faint and muffled that they can't make out what it is. He's screaming for help, and nobody can hear him. He tries pounding on the walls. He tries hitting the glass on the external side of the ATM. He's making noise. Physical, loud noise. But the sound just doesn't carry the way he needs it to. Now comes the moment where James has to think. He's been trapped for maybe 5 or 10 minutes at this point. The panic is there. The fear is definitely there. But he's starting to realize that just screaming and pounding isn't going to work. He needs a different strategy. He needs to communicate with someone. He needs to send a message. And that's when his eyes land on something. The ATM receipt slot. It's this small opening on the external side of the machine. It's designed so that when customers get their receipts, they can pull them out from outside. It's a narrow slot, maybe 3 or 4 inches wide, but it goes through to the outside world. It goes from inside the room where James is trapped, through the wall, to the outside where people are using the ATM. James realizes this is his only lifeline. This is his only way to communicate with someone. He starts looking around the room. What can he use to write with? What can he use as paper? He finds some materials. He finds a way to write. And he composes his first message. Please help. I'm stuck here. I don't have my phone. Simple. Direct. Desperate. He slides the note through the receipt slot. A customer approaches the ATM. They come to get some cash. They insert their card. They do their transaction. And then out comes a piece of paper. But it's not a receipt. It's a handwritten note. The customer reads it. Please help. I'm stuck here. I don't have my phone. The customer's reaction? They think it's a joke. They think it's some kind of prank. Maybe it's a marketing stunt. Maybe it's someone trying to get attention. They laugh. They take the note with them. They go about their day. They don't call anyone. They don't do anything. Because they don't believe it's real. Why would someone be stuck inside an ATM? That doesn't make sense. James, still trapped inside the room, doesn't know that his first message went unheeded. He composes a second note. He tries again. He slides another message through the receipt slot. Another customer comes up to the ATM. Another note comes out. Another person who reads it and doesn't believe it. This is the horror of the situation. James is literally right there. He's maybe 3 feet away from these people. He's separated from them only by a metal and glass wall. And he's trying desperately to communicate, but nobody is listening. Nobody believes what the note says. Minutes keep passing. James is still trapped. He's still sliding notes. He's still hoping that someone, anyone, will take him seriously. And then something changes. A woman approaches the ATM with her husband. She gets a note. She reads it. She shows it to her husband. And instead of laughing or dismissing it, they look at each other. They consider the possibility that this might actually be real. They actually consider that someone might be genuinely trapped in there. They decide to take action. They take the note. They look for a phone number or some information. James had written some details. They call the police. The police get a call. Someone is reporting that a man might be trapped in an ATM room. The dispatcher listens to the story. It sounds strange. It sounds unlikely. But they take the report. They dispatch officers to the location. Within minutes, a police car pulls up to the Bank of America in Corpus Christi. Officer Richard Olden and other officers arrive on scene. They pull up to the ATM. They don't see anything unusual. The ATM appears to be functioning normally. Customers are walking up to it. The situation seems fine from the outside. But the people who called have given them a location. They've told them about the notes. They've told them to listen carefully. The officers decide to investigate. They approach the external ATM area. They listen. And then they hear it. A faint voice coming from inside. Someone is calling for help from inside the ATM vestibule. The officers are confused. This is not what they expected. This is not a typical call. But they take it seriously. They try to open the door from the outside. It's locked from the inside. Standard security feature. But when they try the door from the inside of the bank, they encounter the jammed door. They realize what's happening. Someone is actually trapped in there. Here's where it gets real for the officers. They have to make a decision. The door is jammed on debris and materials from the renovation. They can't easily open it with normal methods. They're going to have to force it. They're going to have to break through. This means they might damage the property. But they realize that's irrelevant. There's a human being trapped in there. They can't just leave him. They can't just say, "Sorry, we'll call the bank manager and wait for him to arrive." This requires immediate action. Officer Olden tells James through the door that they're going to get him out. James hears this. Relief floods through him. After being trapped, after screaming, after writing notes that people didn't believe, after the absolute horror of being stuck in that small space, help is finally here. The officers prepare. They get ready to force the door. James moves back. He gives them space. And then they strike. They hit the door with force. The door is solid. It doesn't give immediately. They hit again. The door is starting to give. They hit a third time. And finally, the door gives way. It flies open. James stumbles out. He's covered in sweat. He's pale. He's shaking. He's just survived being trapped for about 2 hours. He steps out into the bank. He sees the officers. He sees the people around. The nightmare is over. He's been rescued. He's been freed. And what happens next is something that nobody could have predicted. Because James's story doesn't end with his rescue. It actually begins there. Within hours, his story spreads. Someone posts about it online. Someone shares the details. Media outlets pick it up. The New York Times publishes an article. The Washington Post covers it. NPR talks about it. CNN reports on it. The BBC gives it international coverage. This unknown contractor from Texas is suddenly international news. His story is everywhere. But there's a huge problem. The story that's being told isn't actually accurate. The media, in their rush to cover this crazy story, has gotten the details completely wrong. Most news outlets report that James was trapped inside the ATM, that he was stuck inside the mechanical workings of the machine itself, that he was somehow trapped in the electronics and gears. The narrative that spread across the entire internet is that he was literally inside the machine. That's not true. He was in the vestibule. He was in the room with the ATM, not inside the ATM itself. But this false version of the story is what stuck. This is what people remember. This is what people share. The real story, the actual story of how he was trapped, what really happened, gets lost. And James, sitting at home reading about his own experience online, realizes that the world has gotten his story completely wrong. He starts posting in comment sections. He starts trying to correct people. He starts explaining what really happened. But by then, the false narrative has already spread too far. Too many people have already read the wrong version. Too many news outlets have already published the incorrect details. The truth gets buried under layers of misinformation and sensationalism. And James is left in this strange position of being famous for something that didn't actually happen the way people think it happened. This is where the story gets interesting for a different reason. Because it's not just a story about being trapped. It's a story about how quickly misinformation spreads. It's a story about how the media, even with good intentions, can distort reality. It's a story about how a real human experience can get lost in the noise of viral content and internet sensationalism. So here's what happened next. James's name gets revealed. He does start getting interviewed by actual journalists who have a chance to talk to him directly. And when they finally talk to him, the truth comes out. The real truth. And it's completely different from what most people have been reading. James explains that he wasn't even locked in. The door didn't lock. It jammed. The door jammed because of debris from the construction work. Metal, screws, materials all wedged in the frame. That's different from being locked in. Being locked implies that someone or something deliberately closed a lock. But this was just a physical obstruction. The door couldn't move because the frame was blocked. It's a subtle difference, but it changes the entire narrative. And more importantly, it makes James sound way less silly and way more genuinely trapped. James also corrects another detail. The New York Times had reported that he somehow locked himself in on purpose, that he bumbled into a room and accidentally closed the door behind him without thinking. But that's not what happened. He was working on the ATM. He was doing his job. He was a professional contractor. He wasn't being careless or stupid. He just encountered a situation where the door frame had been damaged by renovation materials, and when he tried to exit, the door wouldn't move. It happens. It's just an accident, a really bad accident. When journalists finally get James on record, he tells them what he actually tried before he resorted to the receipt slot method. He tried everything. He set off alarms. He yelled. He screamed his lungs out, trying to get people's attention. But it was a drive-through ATM. The engines of the cars drowned out his voice. The sound of the traffic outside was louder than his shouting. He'd left his phone in his truck charging, so he had no way to call anyone. No one was coming to help him because no one knew he was there. And he was starting to panic because he understood that he might be stuck there for a really long time. That's when he came up with the receipt slot idea. But here's another detail that gets lost in most retellings. He didn't have a pen. Most people don't carry a pen with them all the time. So James was actually considering cutting himself with his knife, writing a note in his own blood to send to people outside the machine. That's how desperate the situation had become. But before he had to resort to that, he found a dried-out Sharpie on the floor of the ATM room. He sucked on the tip to wet the ink, and then he wrote his notes. He actually wrote multiple notes, not just one. He made 4 notes. He cut up an envelope he found and used the pieces. He wrote on them, and he started sliding them through the receipt slot as people made transactions. The first 2 people who got his notes thought it was a joke. They laughed. They left. They didn't do anything. Can you imagine? You get a handwritten note from inside an ATM machine saying you're stuck. You think someone is pranking you. You leave. You go about your day. You don't call the cops. You don't tell anyone. You just assume it's some weird viral marketing thing or a TikTok prank. But the third person took it seriously. And here's something else that people don't know. The reason the third person took it seriously was because of noise. When she walked up to the ATM, she had parked her car. Her car engine wasn't running at that moment, so when James yelled from inside, she could actually hear him. His voice came through clearly enough that she could hear what he was saying. She heard him yelling. She read the note, and she put 2 and 2 together. She realized he was actually trapped in there. She didn't hesitate. She and her husband took the note seriously. They called the police. They gave the dispatcher the information from the note. The dispatcher took the call, and within a short amount of time, officers were on the scene. The police didn't need to be convinced. When they arrived, they tried the normal ways to open the door. Nothing worked. They realized they had to force it. They used equipment to break the door. James was freed. He got out of that room. He was rescued. And then his life changed completely, because the story exploded online. Within hours, it was everywhere. Every news outlet was covering it. Every social media platform was sharing it. Millions of people were reading about the man who got trapped in an ATM. Except they weren't reading the real story. They were reading a version of the story that had been simplified, distorted, and in some cases just made up by people who hadn't actually talked to James. What James went through next is almost as rough as what he went through in that room, because now he's dealing with the consequences of massive misinformation. He's reading headline after headline that says he was trapped inside an ATM. He's seeing articles that claim he locked himself in. He's watching his story get told wrong by every major news organization in the country. And there's not much he can do about it. He tries, he goes on social media, he posts corrections in comment sections. He explains what actually happened. But the damage is already done. The false narrative has spread too far. Only a small percentage of people ever see his corrections. Most people just remember the headline they saw. Most people just remember the viral story they heard from a friend. And in most of those memories, James is the guy who got trapped inside an actual ATM machine. That's not the truth. That's not what happened. But that's what stuck. Some journalists do follow up. Some outlets do pursue real interviews with James. He talks to outlets like Cracked, and the real story gets documented. He talks to local news. He clarifies things. He's interviewed by people who want to actually get the facts right. But by then, the internet has already moved on to the next viral story. The cycle of internet virality has already turned. And James's real story gets lost in the noise. But here's something interesting about James that you find out if you follow his story beyond the viral moment. He's a football coach. He has a community. He has a life. He went back to work. He actually went back to finish the job he was doing when he got trapped. He completed the repair work on the ATM. Why? Because he's a professional. He didn't let one traumatic incident define him or stop him from doing his job. He went back in there and finished what he started. When asked about his sudden fame, he says something that puts the whole thing in perspective. He says he didn't expect for it to become as big as it did. He says he wants people to know him for the positive things he does in his community. He wants to be remembered as Coach James, not as the ATM guy. That's actually really human. He was thrust into this moment of viral fame, and he wasn't comfortable with it. He didn't want to be defined by the worst moment of his life. So what's the real lesson here? What's the actual takeaway from this story? It's not about being trapped in an ATM. It's not about going viral. It's about a man who thought creatively under pressure. He was trapped. He was alone. He was scared. And instead of just panicking, instead of just sitting there and waiting to die, he came up with a solution. He used what he had available. He communicated with the world in the only way he could. He sent messages through a receipt slot. And those messages saved his life. But it's also a story about how easily truth gets distorted in the modern world. How a real story can get turned into something that's not quite right. How millions of people can share something that's fundamentally inaccurate without ever checking the facts. James was trapped for about 3 hours in a room that was physically blocked by debris. But by the time the story reached the masses, he was trapped inside the machine itself. He was trapped in the mechanical guts of an ATM. That version of the story is way more dramatic. That version is way more interesting. And it's completely false. The people who got it wrong didn't do it on purpose. They weren't trying to lie. They just made mistakes. They weren't careful with the details. They prioritized the drama over the accuracy. And that's actually something we see happening all the time. News outlets get it wrong. Social media spreads misinformation. And the real story gets lost. The other part of this story is about the people who read the note. The couple who decided to take it seriously. Most people didn't. Most people laughed it off. But this couple made the choice to believe it. They made the choice to act. And because they made that choice, James got rescued. He survived. He got out of that room. If they had also laughed and left, if they had also assumed it was a prank, James would have still been trapped. He would have had to try something else. He would have had to keep writing notes until someone actually believed him. So, the story is also about the importance of taking people seriously when they're asking for help. It's about the small choices that can make a huge difference. One couple decides to call the cops, and that changes everything. One woman decides to listen to the yelling voice instead of just ignoring it, and that saves a life. It's a good reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. And then there's the part about misinformation. James kept trying to correct the record. He kept explaining what actually happened. But he was one person going up against the entire internet. He was one person trying to correct the narrative that thousands of news outlets had already spread. He didn't have the power or the platform to change people's minds. Most people never saw his corrections. Most people just remembered the story the way they first heard it. That's something that happens all the time in the modern world. Someone experiences something, and then their story gets told wrong, and they spend the rest of their time trying to correct it. They're fighting an uphill battle. The false version is already out there. It's already been shared 1,000,000 times. And the truth is trying to catch up. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you shared something that you didn't actually verify? When was the last time you read a headline and assumed it was accurate without actually reading the article or checking the facts? Because that's what happened with James's story. Millions of people shared a headline without ever knowing what it actually said. Millions of people repeated a story that wasn't quite right. And that one person's real experience got lost in the noise. The message here is to be careful with the stories you share. Check the facts before you spread something. Listen to the actual people involved before you believe what you've read. Because once misinformation gets out there, once the false narrative spreads, it's almost impossible to put the truth back in the bottle. James's story will probably live on the internet forever as the story of the man who got trapped inside an ATM. That's not true, but it's the story most people believe, and there's not much anyone can do to change that. So subscribe if you want to know the real stories. Comment below and tell me the most ridiculous version of a true story you've ever heard. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder to check their facts before they share something online. Because the world needs more people who care about getting the truth right.